I don't know why I was nervous about the new Frasier series because everything James Burrows touches turns to gold. The first episode is so fabulous, and there will be spoilers in this discussion because I have so many thoughts. This discussion is probably going to be quite scattered compared to my usual Frasier reviews because everything is new, everything is exciting, and very emotional as well. In the episodes going forward, I expect things will be a little bit more structured from me and maybe not so much all over the place, but my thoughts are chronological. So I'm basically going to go through things as we experience them, share some thoughts as they came up. But if you don't want the spoilers, I will very briefly sum up. It's amazing. I first laughed out loud at 2 minutes and 20. All of the characters introduced are amazing. Some are quite like characters in the original Frasier, and again, I will, with a spoiler warning, talk about some comparisons that I personally saw, and I am in love with it. It is very different so far, but Frasier still feels like Frasier, and I was nervous about this in the way I imagine people felt nervous about Frasier after watching Cheers. I actually watched the original Frasier before Cheers, so I didn't have that experience of how could a Frasier show without the Cheers gang possibly work. Going into this, I thought, how can a Frasier show without Niles and Daphne and Martin possibly work? But based on this first episode, it absolutely does. So there will be huge spoilers from now. I'm going to go through things basically chronologically. I'm not going to go into every single plot point, but just things that I think are worth mentioning. So there will be absolutely huge spoilers from now. Future discussions might be spoiler free. We'll see how things go. So, as I said, this is directed by James Burrows, who is just amazing. And I feel like that was so essential, particularly for this first episode. And this first episode is called The Good Father. The first episode of Frasier, the original Frasier, is The Good Son. And we actually have intertitle cards throughout this. So it definitely feels like the original Frasier. And the intertitle cards refer back to other Frasier episode titles. So again, it's kind of saying we're a new show, but we're retaining a lot of the beauty that you love from the original Frasier, and we are, at least in this first episode, going to make frequent reference to it. The opening scene is written in a way where it completely answers all of the questions of where Frasier has been, roughly what happened at the end of the last Frasier episode and what life has been like in between then, and why he is now in Boston. He's actually come back to Boston to guest lecture for Alan, who is the character of Nicholas Lyndhurst, and he's doing a guest lecture at Harvard. And he's also flown into Boston with his nephew David, Niles and Daphne's son. David is played by Anders Keith, and I love him so much. He is so much like Niles. There's bits of Daphne in there, but his mannerisms, the way he acts, the way he presents himself, he is a lot like Niles. He's not a carbon copy, but immediately I recognized Niles in him. And I'm not saying that he's replacing Niles, but I feel like a lot of the comedy we got from Niles that I knew I'd miss with the reboot, I think we're going to get from David. And I think that that's a wonderful decision. Also, by having David there, and I'm assuming he's going to have I hope he's going to have a prominent role going forward. It means that we have the opportunity to bring up Niles and Daphne every now and then. So I love him as a character. I love the humour he has brought to this. I love that he really looks up to Frasier as well, which is not what we get with Freddy, but I'll come to Freddy in a moment. I absolutely loved the opening scene. The first time I laughed out loud, I made a note, it was 2 minutes 20, and it's the bit when David put the luggage onto the trolley and Frasier said, I don't have the heart to tell him it's not my luggage. And it was just absolutely perfect. A brilliant way to recap everything that's happened. We get a mention of Martin there and the fact that it's just been his funeral. Really solid start to what turns out to be a brilliant episode. So the rest of my thoughts are probably even a little bit more scattered, as they are just notes that I have written down as things have come up in the episode. And of course, the first one is Freddy. Freddy is now played by Jack Cutmore-Scott, and he's a firefighter. If I'd had to try and guess what his profession would have been, I don't think it would have been firefighter, but at the same time, I think it works. I think it fits quite well. And he's very standoffish. He doesn't have this brilliant relationship with Frasier. He doesn't really seem to look up to Frasier. And Frasier's obviously very disheartened about that. And we learn that Freddy didn't go to Martin's funeral. And immediately I thought, that means I don't love you as a character. But throughout the episode, we do learn why that was the case. And I know I've said spoilers, but I won't give it away completely. And I feel like everything is just so well developed within this one little episode that we learn so much. There's so much mystery, but we also learn a lot. We also meet Eve. Eve is played by Jess Salgueiro, and again, there's a lot of mystery surrounding her character and this character called John. And I will be honest, John is not who I thought John was when we first got the mention of John. I'll be perfectly honest, I thought Freddy was gay. I thought John was a boyfriend. He was trying to hide from his father because he was worried how Frasier would react. And honestly, I think Frasier would be fine with it. But then we learn it's a baby, and then we think it's Freddy's baby, and then we learn that it's not Freddy's baby. And just the emotional roller coaster of this first episode is so incredible. I also think having a baby in this is going to help make it slightly different from classic Frasier, because it means we have the opportunity to have storylines that we didn't previously. So I'm keen to see what they do with this part of the narrative. We also meet Olivia Finch. She's the department head at Harvard. She is played by Toks Olagundoye, and I really liked her as a character. There was a tiny bit of Roz in her personality, not so much as David and Niles, but I did see just a tiny glimmer of Roz in her characteristics, and I think that strong female personality, I think, is going to work really well. We do have a scene in a bar, and we get a mention of a certain bar. The fact that we're in Boston made me so excited, not just because I'm going to Boston next month, but because I'm a big Cheers fan. I kind of prefer Cheers to Frasier, just slightly, just ever so slightly, but I do. So I'm really hope we have to have some Cheers cameos at some point, but I'm keen to see what they do with that. By the time we get to the bar and they're Olivia and Alan and Frasier are sitting having drinks, I realised then that the kind of comedy we're going to get from Alan is very dry. I love this kind of dry wit, and I think he's going to actually provide a few different types of comedy, but certainly based on this first episode, that's what I'm getting from him. And again, just to make comparisons, I feel like a lot of his retorts are very similar to things Martin might have said. Again, not that he's replacing Martin, but I was worried about where we'd get these sources of comedy from, because for me personally, a lot of the comedy in original Frasier comes from Niles and Martin, and it's very clear to me in this episode where those gaps are going to be filled, but without directly replacing those characters. And I think it's very cleverly done. Really looking forward to seeing what they do with Alan as a character. Emotionally, I managed to hold it together throughout most of the episode until they said Detective Martin Crane. And at that point, I kind of lost it a little bit, and I'm welling up now. And from that point on, it was a little bit emotional, but then they managed to bring back the comedy when we learn that Frasier has, well, we think he's rented the apartment directly opposite them. And then we learn that he hasn't rented the apartment, he's bought the entire building. And I just love that. And immediately we have some more comedy right at the end there. And I also want to point out that initially I thought Freddy's apartment was going to give this kind of claustrophobic feel because it's a very small space, it's very cramped, but then we get to see a brief look at Frasier's new apartment and it's much more open plan. It seemed like a much larger apartment, and I feel like the decor for that space is going to be a lot cleaner, a lot neater, providing initially a contrast to Freddy's apartment, but also I think a space that's going to be a lot more pleasant to look at. These are just my predictions going forward, but I'm really keen. I haven't looked ahead, really keen to see what they do with that space. And then, just as I managed to dry my eyes and enjoy that last bit of comedy, we end with a clip of John Mahoney, and it's a very brief clip as he addresses the camera, and it was such a beautiful thing for them to do, and it's moved me to tears, and I'm so glad that they've been able to honour his memory immediately, and I am very emotional. And then right at the end, we get the theme tune. I don't know what it's like if it aired on TV, but certainly on Paramount Plus, it didn't start with the theme tune. We had to wait until the end to get it. It is wonderful. There are so many little things, little Easter eggs, if you like, reflecting back to the classic series, and I just think it's beautifully written, great cast of characters, wonderful style of comedy, different types of comedy coming from different characters. It answered so many questions in this first episode, yet I still have so many questions about the type of things we can see going forward. I am over the moon, overjoyed with how this first episode has gone because, as I said, I was nervous. I was worried they were going to ruin the magic of Frasier because that can happen when you reboot or relaunch a series. It's one of the reasons why they've not redone Friends because it was so perfect. You don't want to risk ruining it. It was a risk with Frasier, but based purely on this first episode, they've done an amazing job. James Burrows has done an amazing job, and I have nothing but hope and positivity going forward. I cannot wait to watch the rest of this season.